Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Shri Radhe. Jaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 All right. I'm going to try and share my PowerPoint. So, more than anything else, as per usual, let's contextualize. Who can remind us where are we now? What have we been reading?
So in the last few classes, there have been all of these bad omens that King Yudhisthira has been seeing, and he was wondering where Arjuna was. He hadn't been there for a few months. Arjuna came back. Yudhisthira was asking all these questions about what was going on, in Dwarka, and Arjuna is just so downtrodden, and he reveals that everything that's ever happened to him is kind of disappearing and is no longer there because Krishna has left the world.
All right. And then, pardon, we're finding up. That's a very nice contextualization. That's maybe the power of sitting in front of the class. Thank you so much. So, that's our context for today. But even before we jump into the verses, one more thing I want us to look at. So, one of my goals with today's class is to meditate on Srila Prabhupada as an extraordinary writer and look at this writing talent, writing power that he has and how he engaged it in Krishna's service. Anyone know what that picture on the left is indicating? What's happening here? Where is it and what's happening? It's cool. You want to use the mic? Darmandir, and out of two rooms where Prabhupada was living, this room is specifically on the left, which has a window to the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. Prabhupada was directly seeing Rupa Goswami. And I believe Rupa Goswami was encouraging him, so instructing him, right? So he must carry on this great tradition. Who of you have read Our Family Business by Vaisheshika Prabhu? makes it very clear that our family business is that of writing and distributing literature. So of course, Prabhupada did an immense amount of writing. And let's specifically look today, when we read the purports, just look out for the next three things. Firstly, of course, Prabhupada is always sharing profound spiritual knowledge and spiritual insights. But what I also find very fascinating, especially in the first canto, he shares some profound, quote-unquote, worldly knowledge, what you could call like political, economical, sociological, psychological. Really nice insights on that front as well. So let's keep an eye out for that. And then lastly, just his word choice, the connotations and the meanings of the words that he chooses. He did not write just frivolously. He really thought about every single word and the meaning that he would communicate. Let's look at all those things as we go through today's class. Okay. Now, Nate, I'm wondering, I have the verse here, but let's just, you can, actually, maybe I can do it. Yeah, I think so. Sounds pretty good. I'm not 100% sure about the meter for this one, but I think it is Yudhisthira sta parisarpanam Buddha Charastre Charvihe Tatatmani Vivavya Lobandrita Jimahi Sanadi Adharma Chakram Gamanaya Paryada. I think that's the right meter. Chop. Maharaj Yudhisthira was intelligent enough to understand the influence of the age of Kali, characterized by increasing avarice, falsehood, cheating, and violence throughout the capital, state, home, and among individuals. So he wisely prepared himself to leave home, and he dressed accordingly. Does anyone want to guess what we might find in the book? things that I mentioned about Prabhupada's writing. Yes.
Some worldly knowledge about the age of Kali and the influences of avarice, falsehood, cheating, and violence, and perhaps some examples of such.
Any other ideas?
Seems like Yudhisthira is leaving home and dressed accordingly. So maybe there'll be some kind of call to action.
Some call to action or something about what Yudhisthira is doing? Yes, yes.
Might talk about like the cheating propensity. He tends to touch on that a lot, like how we have like the cheating propensity in the material world, and then cheating.
Okay. Let's see. We're gonna dive in. Who wants to read for us? Bruce. Hit it.
Purport. The present age is influenced by the specific qualities of Kali. Since the days of the Battle of Kurukshetra, about 5,000 years ago, the influence of the age of Kali began manifesting. And from authentic scriptures, it is learned that the age of Kali is still to run on for 427,000 years. The symptoms of Kali Yuga, as mentioned above, namely avarice, falsehood, diplomacy, cheating, nepotism, violence, and all such things, are already in vogue. And no one can imagine what is going to happen gradually with further increase in the influence of Kali till the day of annihilation. We have already come to know that the influence of the age of Kali is meant for godless, so-called civilized man. Those who are under the protection of the Lord have nothing to fear from this horrible age. Maharaj Yudhisthira was a great devotee of the Lord, and there was no necessity of his being afraid of the age of Kali, but he preferred to retire from active household life and prepare himself to go back home, back to Godhead. The Pandavas are eternal companions of the Lord, and therefore they are more interested in the company of the Lord than anything else. Besides that, being an ideal king, Maharaj Yudhisthira wanted to retire just to set an example for others. As soon as there's some young fellow to look after the household affairs, one should at once retire from family life to uplift oneself to spiritual realization. One should not rot in the dark well of household life till one is dragged out by the will of Yamaraj. Modern politicians should take lessons from Maharaj Yudhisthira about voluntary retirement from active life and should make room for the younger generation. Also, retired old gentlemen should take lessons from him and leave home for spiritual realization before being forcefully dragged away to meet death.
Okay. So those three things I wanted to highlight about Prabhupada's writing, I feel like they're all here in this purport. For example, word choice. Should not rot in the dark well. One thing I found very interesting, Prabhupada mentions all these bad symptoms of Kali Yuga, cheating propensities, falsehood, and then he uses this phrase, which are already in vogue, which means it's trending, it's popular. Right? He could have said these things are seen, or these things have begun, or whatever, but he said it's in vogue. In other words, people think that it's a good thing. People think that's what you should do. People see others do it and then follow the trend, hop on the trend. You see how that word choice really conveys deeper meaning? Okay. Some other examples. Prabhupada shared some spiritual insights. He reminded us that the influence of the age of Kali is meant for the godless civilization. But the devotee is under protection from the Lord and has nothing to fear from this horrible age. That's some profound spiritual insight, right? And just the power of the protection of Krishna. And then some worldly knowledge, speaking about politicians who should take lessons from Yudhisthira Maharaj. In ancient times, it was the norm that you step aside, when you get to a certain age. Firstly, because you need to be taking care of your own soul and the direction you're going in after this life. But also, there are so many other qualified individuals, pass the baton on to the next generation. So, go back to my slideshow. So, Kali Yuga was approaching. This image, I don't know whether you can see it. I zoomed in on the right. All these symptoms of Kali Yuga. Vyasadeva was predicting them already. Strife, protests. You can even see some police brutality or something in there. Drugs. There's a guy at the bottom injecting himself. So many bad things. So Kali Yuga was approaching. Now I have a question for you. Think about King Yudhisthira. So these are the Pandavas, right? Look at these 5 brothers. Pretty much even cooler than the Avengers, right? These guys were, let's say, untouchable, right? Do you think, okay, let me first ask, what are the 2 reasons that are implied that maybe King Yudhisthira might have wanted to retire? Kind of the reasons that someone would usually want to retire in this situation. Ideas? Yes, Jackson?
He's getting old, and that managerial position could be passed on, and he could go take sannyas.
But I'm thinking more for his own sake. What are the reasons that were implied that for his own sake he should be retired? Yes. It's missing Krishna, okay. What else? What do we got? Jackson?
He can now just start placing full focus in the spiritual life.
Right. So what's implied is that this position of being a king is a little bit contaminating. What might we mean by that? Any ideas, Bruce?
I can think of 2 things. When you're a king, you have to behave like a king, and it's not necessarily the most conducive for taking on that role of like Krishna servant or having the mentality. Like you're still doing that, but sometimes you have to act in a way that doesn't isn't so congruent with it.
Right.
And then number 2 is you have to worry about so many other things all the time.
Great.
Instead of worrying about focusing on Krishna.
Krishna consciousness is about taking ourselves out of the center, putting Krishna in the center. But imagine being a king. You are the center of the whole kingdom, right? So, yes, this position can be contaminating, quote unquote. But Prabhupada mentioned in the purport, there was nothing to fear. So the other reason I thought of why one might say he should have retired is because Kali Yuga is approaching, right? But Prabhupada makes it clear in the purport, no one, you could argue, is closer to Krishna than these Pandava brothers. Right? They're really powerful and they're very Krishna conscious. But to set an example, that's the way of Vedic society, right? Vedic society is extremely cultural, and it's about a spiritual culture, and it's about setting an example for others. So that's the main reason Maharaj Yudhisthira actually retired, even though there was no reason to do so. It's not like he had been contaminated by this service of being a king. In fact, what is another phrase that we use to refer to Yudhisthira Maharaj? One of his titles. Dharmaraj. What does that mean? It means that you could have 2 interpretations. You could say he's the king, he's the lord of all dharma. Or it could just mean he's a very righteous king, a king who follows dharma, right? So if you want to take an example of a monarch who was not contaminated by doing the service, I think Yudhisthira Maharaj is probably the best example you can find. So, for example, it is said that he never told a single lie throughout his whole life. And Krishna wanted to involve him in a lie. Maybe some of you remember the pastime. The battle of Kurukshetra was going on. And Dronacharya on the opposite side was so powerful that they had to get in his mind if they had any chance of defeating him. So Dronacharya's son was called Ashvatthama. So Krishna wanted to trick him into thinking that his son had died on the battlefield. So he asked Yudhisthira to announce that Ashvatthama was dead. But there was also an elephant called Ashvatthama that had died. So Yudhisthira was actually speaking about the elephant, really, and in that way maintained his righteousness, his honesty. So that's an example of how righteous Yudhisthira was. So there's no question of him being contaminated, but just to set an example for others, right? For that reason, Maharaj Yudhisthira put on the dress of a sannyasi, of a renounced man, and he headed, well, we'll see in the later verses, he headed north. So Maharaj Yudhisthira wanted to retire just to set an example for others. And then Prabhupada reminds us, modern politicians should take lessons from him on voluntary retirement from active life. Can we think of any examples of politicians who cling to the position? Yeah, who are past their prime. But, yeah, are you ready for a jump scare? Boom. Yes, that's Joe Biden. And then we have some other examples. Current president. Trump is currently 78 years old. Did you know that? Biden was 82 just a few months ago when he was still president. The median age for US presidents when they are inaugurated is 55 years of age. That's when in Vedic society people would have been heading to the mountains. I don't know if any of you would know this. You would know? Oh, you also? Mugabe, Robert Mugabe, the president of Zimbabwe, but I don't know if president is really an objective and fair term. He's pretty much a dictator. He used all the tricks from the dictator book, persecuting journalists that would write something bad about him, persecuting, imprisoning, and killing political opposition. He was president until the ripe old age of 93, or maybe 94, I'm not sure, and then he died at the age of 95. So his death being so close to giving up presidency actually makes it clear that it's only for health reasons that he even stopped. He would have gone on as long as he could. So, yes, our modern politicians, they really should take some advice from these Vedic authorities, these Vedic examples. I have something interesting for you, some information. I'm not going to say who it is because the person is very private. We were just speaking about astrology this morning. There's a devotee astrologer who said to me, take this as you like. But he said that some years ago, Donald Trump approached him for a reading before he was to begin his first 4 years in office. So some of these personalities, they know about Vedic knowledge and they make use of it. But to what end? Just to enhance their power, basically. It's all about power for them. It's all about power, position, money, influence. So some of them know of this Vedic knowledge, but they cherry pick and they don't follow all of the Vedic knowledge. They don't take it as an absolute authority. Otherwise, they would have taken heed by the example set by Maharaj Yudhisthira. Okay. So, verse 37 was about Maharaj Yudhisthira setting an example. Verse 38. Thereafter, in the capital of Hastinapur, he enthroned his grandson, who was trained and equally qualified as the emperor and master of all land bordered by the sea. Fine. Then he posted Vajra, the son of Aniruddha, the grandson of Lord Krishna, at Mathura as the king of Shurasena. Afterwards, Maharaj Yudhisthira performed a Prajapatya sacrifice and placed in himself the fire for quitting household life. Now, can we go to the purport made for text 39, please? Now, again, remember those three things about Prabhupada's writing: spiritual knowledge, worldly knowledge, and the word choice. Let's see what we can find in this purport. Who'd like to read this one for us?
Maharaj Yudhisthira, after placing Maharaj Parikshit on the imperial throne of Hastinapur, and after posting Vajra, the great grandson of Lord Krishna, as the king of Mathura, accepted the renounced order of life. The system of 4 orders of life and 4 castes in terms of quality and work, known as Varnashrama Dharma, is the beginning of real human life, and Maharaj Yudhisthira, as the protector of this system of human activities, timely retired from active life as a sannyas, handing over the charge of the administration to a trained prince, Maharaj Parikshit. The scientific system of Varnashram Dharma divides the human life into 4 divisions of occupation and 4 orders of life. The 4 orders of life as brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas are to be followed by all, irrespective of the occupational division. Modern politicians do not wish to retire from active life, even if they are old enough. But Yudhisthira Maharaj, as an ideal king, voluntarily retired from active administrative life to prepare himself for the next life. Everyone's life must be so arranged that the last stage of life, say at least the last 15 to 20 years prior to death, can be absolutely devoted to the devotional service of the Lord to attain the highest perfection of life. It is really foolishness to engage oneself all the days of one's life in material enjoyment and fruitive activities, because as long as the mind remains absorbed in fruitive work for material enjoyment, there is no chance of getting out from conditioned life or material bondage. No one should follow the suicidal policy of neglecting one's supreme task of attaining the highest perfection of life, namely going back home, back to Godhead.
Any favorite parts that anyone noticed?
I like this last part. Like following the suicidal policy.
Yeah, I wrote that down in my notes too. So again, think about that word choice that I was mentioning. Right? Very striking words. So Prabhupada also said at one point, this system known as Varnashram Dharma is the beginning of real human life. That's an interesting insight, right? That really makes you think. So the theme of all these verses is that at some point we need to start detaching a little bit from the material energy and start focusing on our spiritual life. We have to prioritize our spiritual life. And this purport specifically spoke about this social system, Vedic social system of Varnashram Dharma. So you have a whole societal structure, a whole system that pushes everyone towards some level of renunciation. The beginning is brahmacharya, where you're a student, very much absorbed in spiritual studies and spiritual austerities. Then you can marry after that if you'd like, but Grihastha ashram is still a spiritual, social construct. Yeah, that's the word I was thinking of too, like a spiritual social construct. The focus on the Grihastha ashram is still having the deity, having Krishna at the center of your home, serving the other members of society, very spiritual. Then vanaprastha, where you and your spouse start, renouncing from the marriage itself a little bit, and then ultimately sannyasa. Prabhupada said, it is really foolishness to engage oneself all the days of one's life in material enjoyment and fruitive activities. Listen to this, because as long as the mind remains absorbed in fruitive work for material enjoyment, there is no chance of getting out from conditioned life or material bondage. It's just as simple as that. You cannot have your mind constantly absorbed in material things. And then the section at the end is presence of Nate said, no one should follow the suicidal policy of neglecting one's supreme task of attaining the highest perfection of life, namely going back home. Okay, let's keep going. Next text is 40. Maharaj Yudhisthira at once relinquished all his garments, belt, and ornaments of the royal order and became completely disinterested and unattached to everything. Okay. We're going to read one more purport there with me. Who would like to read this one? Yes, Jackson. Purport for text 40.
Read off of Bruce's phone.
Yeah, you can start reading.
To become purified of material contamination is the necessary qualification for becoming one of the associates of the Lord. No one can become an associate of the Lord or can go back to Godhead without such purification. Maharaj Yudhisthira, therefore, to become spiritually pure, at once gave up his royal opulence, relinquishing his royal dress and garments. The kashya or saffron loincloth of a sannyasi indicates freedom from all attractive material garments, and thus he changed his dress accordingly. He became disinterested in his kingdom and family, and thus became free from all material contamination or material designation. People are generally attached to various kinds of designations. The designations of family, society, country, occupation, wealth, position, and many others. As long as one is attached to such designations, he is considered materially impure. The so-called leaders of men in the modern age are attached by national consciousness, but they do not know that such false consciousness is also another designation of the materially conditioned soul. One has to relinquish such designations before one can become eligible to go back to Godhead. Foolish people adore such men who die in national consciousness. But here is an example of Maharaj Yudhisthira, a royal king who prepared himself to leave this world without such national consciousness, and yet he is remembered even today because he was a great pious king, almost on the same level with the personality of Godhead Sri Ram. And because people of the world were dominated by such pious kings, they were happy in all respects, and it was quite possible for such great emperors to rule the world.
Again, the verse, Maharaj Yudhisthira at once relinquished all his garments, belt, and ornaments of the royal order and became completely disinterested and unattached to everything. And then the purport spoke about all these designations. So, especially for a king, of course, we spoke about how Maharaj Yudhisthira was very, very righteous and very unattached actually to his position. He was very Krishna conscious. But for an ordinary man, if you were to be in a position like this, you would become very attached to all those opulences, all that power, the dominion you have over other people. So maybe none of us have experienced a material designation quite to that extent, but we have our own material designation. So maybe you can think for a second. Of course, now you're all devotees aspiring to become pure and just solely focused on service to Krishna. But not all of us grew up with Krishna consciousness, and even those in the room that did, we still have some material designations, some ways in which we identify with some material roles or material maybe skills or talents that we have. So you don't have to take the mic, just anyone if you want. Shout out some identities that you might have. So for myself, it might be like musician, or because I studied for 7 years and did some postgraduate studies as well. Sounds so lame, but maybe I might say academic. Any designations like that? Student? Body worker? Okay, that's cool. Athlete? Wow, we got an athlete over here. Tech support. Okay. Artist? Okay, I like that one. Music, so maybe musician. Of course, some of these designations we definitely can engage in Krishna's service, and then they become purified. They are transformed. Pujari, okay. So we have these material designations, right? And Prabhu mentioned that people are generally very attached to these designations. And I have a little story for you. This happened not too long ago. I won't go into the details, it's kind of random, but something happened. Basically, I got some information and I completely misinterpreted it. And I thought that I didn't have long to live. I'm fine, just so you know. I'm totally fine. Well, of course, death can come at any moment, so we should never be too comfortable. But I remember when I came across this information, like my heart skipped a few beats. It was very, very interesting. Of course, in Krishna consciousness, we're always theoretically meditating on this fact that life is temporary, material body is temporary, we have to give it up. Death is around any corner, it's always approaching. We know this theoretically. But this experience I had, trust me when I say I had never gone this deeply into that realization. I was listening to some, again, astrology. It's so funny that this morning we had that quote. I was listening because I'm trying to learn more about astrology, so I was doing services here actually and just listening. And then randomly, this whole realization came. And I remember thinking, what am I doing? Why am I listening to this right now? I should be listening to like Bhagavatam. I should be meditating on Krishna every second of the day. So I really deeply went into this realization that none of these things that aren't related to Krishna, none of these things are going with us. So we have to be very careful with our time. Okay, now, a completely different point, but also on this topic of material designations. So when his parents were here and they were celebrating his birthday, this is Jackson and his family. Previous life. So that's a material designation, Jackson. Your mother and your father. The Bhagavatam tells us we've had millions of fathers and mothers. So should you have told your parents, why are you flying? I'm assuming they flew. Why are you flying all the way from Texas? Like, we're spirit souls. Like, birthday? I don't want to celebrate my birthday. Just stay at home. Focus on Krishna. Would you have done that ever? No? So why do we not do that? Why do we not do that? Why do we not do that? Why do... Okay, that's fine. That's one answer. What else could we say? Continue, want to say something?
I mean, I was thinking also we have to meet ourselves where we're at.
Okay. There's something else. There's a deeper reason. Yes.
Well, I think it's in alignment with something I was actually thinking during your class. How we renounce our material designations, right? We retire from material life. But Prabhupada, he even said, like, I want to die on the battlefield and spiritual service. So he didn't retire from his service to Krishna, and we've seen that in our movement, like Gopal Krishna Maharaj, many of these great souls, doing their service to their guru up until the time of death. And so similarly with this, like, why wouldn't he just say that to his parents? We, in our consciousness, two things. One, we realize that, this is a temporary material relationship, but it's also, when we come to Krishna consciousness, it becomes a spiritual relationship, because all of our relationships become spiritual, and bhakti isn't about negating the world, it's about transforming the world, and it's about interacting with everyone we meet, and every object that we see is the microphone material or spiritual? It depends on how we use it. So it's about engaging with the world, and love for God manifests in the world as compassion for all living beings. So the heart of a devotee is to share Krishna consciousness with everyone that they meet. And the way that they share might be, to say, Mom, I love you, because we have to, Prabhupada did that. He touched people's hearts.
Yes, yes. Great answer. Thank you so much. So that is the point. You think of it like this. It's not about giving up relationships in this context, speaking about family relationships. It's not about giving up relationships, but about giving up the incorrect understanding of the relationship. That's all. It's about keeping Krishna in the center. I often use this example because this is my experience. I've been married for a little while now. So in the male role, you might have some level of protection you might want to offer to your spouse. You can do that, and you should do that. You should do that. But you should also realize that your power is limited. Krishna is the only one that can offer any other human being ultimate shelter and ultimate protection. So we don't give up relationships, but we understand them in the right spiritual context. That's all. So I just wanted to add this part to the class as well. We're speaking so much about renunciation and giving up designations, but please be careful not to become basically an impersonalist through false renunciation. Right? Rupa Goswami was teaching us so nicely about what renunciation really is. There's false renunciation, and then there's yukta vairagya, the real renunciation, where everything is actually spiritual. Everything can be spiritualized if we engage in Krishna service and if we see it in its correct relationship that it already has with Krishna. Okay, I just wanted to mention that. So, just a quick recap at this point. Maharaj Yudhisthira saw the symptoms of Kali approaching and he wanted to retire. And Prabhupada made it very clear in the purport that he was already fully Krishna conscious, but just to set the example, he did this, and then he enthroned his grandson, he put others in charge, and he took on the garb of a sannyas, right? And that cloth of the sannyas is an indication that all other designations are given up. So let's just read the final few verses that we have. 141. Yes, something.
Then he amalgamated all the sense organs into the mind. Then the mind into life, life into breathing, his total existence into the embodiment of the 5 elements, his body into death. Then, as the pure self, he became free from the material conception of life.
Okay, this verse might be a little strange. Amalgamated means like you include it into the totality, you almost like absorb it into one. So this verse is indicating what we've seen in many other parts of the Bhagavatam. Some of the meditation techniques, the sadhanas that they would perform in other ages. But basically what's happening here, you can think of it like this. So we all know that we have a false ego, intelligence, and a mind, right? Those are some of the first manifestations of our material body, you could say. Now, they follow from one another. When you have a false ego, when you forget Krishna and your relationship with him, then there's a false ego that develops. And based on that, then you want material intelligence, then you want a material mind. And then because you want a material mind, you need a material body and you need senses through which the body can experience the world. So you can see how one develops from the other, right? So now kind of a reversal is happening here. That's basically what this is. So amalgamate the sense organs back into the mind, then the mind into the prana and the breathing. And then take that all into the 5 elements, the material energy. It mentions there he amalgamated his body into death. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that basically what Maharaj Yudhisthira is doing is he's saying that this body belongs to death. It is something that is temporary. So it's basically just meditating on how all these material designations, this material body, all those things, it's not us. You are not your body. That's basically what's happening here. Right? And then it says, as pure self, he became free from the material conception of God. Okay, it goes on and explains this process a little more. I'll read the next one. Thus annihilating the gross body of 5 elements into the 3 qualitative modes of material nature, he merged them in one nescience and then absorbed that nescience in the self, Brahman, which is inexhaustible in all circumstances. So now he's reaching that meditation, that absorption in Brahman. Okay, 2 more verses. Anyone want to read this one?
Yudhisthira dressed himself in torn clothing, gave up eating all solid foods, voluntarily became dumb, and let his hair hang loose. All this combined to make him look like an urchin or madman with no occupation. He did not depend on his brothers for anything, and just like a deaf man, he heard nothing.
Voluntarily became dumb, not like what you become after too much TikTok doom scrolling. Dumb here means like not speaking. So this is also what they would do in ancient Vedic culture. Voluntarily act like you're not all there. Just so that you can actually be left alone and focus on your final sadhana and the final stages of life. Okay, and then the final one.
He then started towards the north, treading the path accepted by his forefathers and great men to devote himself completely to the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he lived in that way wherever he went.
I really like this final verse, especially that path, that part. Treading the path accepted by his forefathers and great men. So just showing that this following the Varnashram system, renouncing at the final stages of life, it's part of tradition. Maharaj Yudhisthira, we saw how he's setting this example for others, but he was also following the example of those who came. Okay. Any final? There's the picture again. It's heading north into the Himalayas. Any final questions, comments, chastisements? Continue.
This part about Varnashram, like after Grihastha, like leaving and all of that, is kind of confusing for me because I've heard before that actually taking sannyasa in Kali Yuga is not a good idea. And I also heard stories of devotees who stayed married until the end of their lives in a way that was actually approved, like by the Supreme Lord. And so I'm questioning whether that's a path that everyone should be taking. And also, like I also heard stories of actual devotees that leaving by the end of life, but maybe not in a way that was sincere from within the heart. And so like I feel like if you're not ready to do something like that, then it might actually be negative for your spiritual life, especially for the woman who's like usually is more attached, and so if she's just left alone, then I think it could be bad for her. So yeah, that's what was on my mind.
Mahatma Prabhu actually likes sharing this story, and he was also very eager to take sannyas. It was very much what all the young men wanted to do in the 70s. And he wrote to Prabhupada asking permission. He wants to take sannyas. And Prabhupada severely chastised him in a response letter, saying that married and you have family to take care of. About this, basically. So yes, very good point. Thank you, Kunti. Sannyas sometimes is said to be forbidden in this age. In our society currently, we still have sannyasis, we still do that, but I think the point remains that it should be very carefully approached. And then you also mentioned that some people stay married. So I think the general point is just that even if you stay married, we can still, within that situation of being a married couple, you can still show a great example of renunciation. Right? Usually, these advanced devotees, they would engage in preaching, they would do a lot of service. So in that way, they're basically living like renunciates. Advaita wanted to add something?
I had a similar question about, each stages of life are recommended for everyone, and what is the woman to do? It's almost like she's not considered, because women in Vedic culture were not traditionally meant to take sannyas, but like, do we also have to just rot in household life until death takes us? And then we don't really, like, the sons and the progeny of today don't want to stay with the parents to take care of them. So it's like, yeah, that's why we have people dying in nursing homes and things like that.
So sannyas in its strict sense is definitely not recommended for women, just because this world is a nasty place. That's the first thing that I would say, the first reason why it's not well suited. So for a woman to be alone and travel around and just live like that, it's not very natural, it's not very good. There should always be some other facets of society that protect women, basically. So when a man takes sannyas, he can only do so, should only do so, if his wife is properly taken care of, even in his absence. If there, in other words, if there are children, anyone else willing to take care of them. And definitely they should not then rot in the well, as you said. But the ladies also take on renunciation. Externally might look a little bit differently, but it's exactly the same thing. They're dedicating they should be dedicating those last facets of their life exclusively to their spiritual well-being.
Yeah, Prabhupada said, and Bhaktivinoda also said that if the home is congenial for spiritual life, then it's not necessary to take sannyas. And also, I think in our society nowadays, you have to be at least 60 to take sannyas. So there's been some changes.
Any other final thoughts? Maybe one more thing. Prasada and Stan, it's right here. Yes, Prabhu.
There's a couple of verses from the fifth canto, fifth chapter that comes to mind.
Talking about purifying the mind. If a person is engaged in any kind of karma, his mind is called karmatmika, colored with fruit of activity. As long as the mind is impure, consciousness is unclear, and as long as one is absorbed in fruit of activity, he has to accept the material body. When the living entity is covered by the mode of ignorance, he does not understand the individual living being and the supreme living being, and his mind is subjugated by fruit of activity. Therefore, unless one has love for Lord Vasudeva, who is none other than myself, this is Shabbadev speaking, he is certainly not delivered from having to accept the material body again and again. So it's this consciousness of Krishna that makes us lose interest in karmic activity. Thank you, Prabhu.